There were toothpicks in the omelet. Not by accident. Not the kind that restaurants stick in to mark gluten-free or no cheese. No, I'm talking 3 full wooden toothpicks, buried inside like landmines. And when I bit into one, cracked a molar, mind you, she just stood there, smiling. Not even fake smiling. Like, genuinely amused. I stared at her across the breakfast table, bleeding into a napkin, and she said, "Well, now you'll finally go to the dentist." I laughed. The kind of laugh you let out when your brain is short-circuiting and you don't want to believe what's actually happening. I said something dumb like, "You're kidding, right?" And she just blinked slowly and replied, "I didn't think you'd actually eat it." No apology. No concern. Just a smug little smirk, like she'd caught me cheating at Monopoly. And that's when it clicked for me. This woman hated me. I don't know when it started. I don't even know if she knows. But somewhere between the IKEA couch we assembled on our anniversary and the night she told her sister I dressed like a disappointed substitute teacher, something inside her switched off. And I became a hobby. A project. A thing to mess with. That same week, she installed a new doorbell. One that records audio. When I asked why, she said it was for safety. But I saw the footage one night when she forgot to log out of the app. She'd been using it to listen to me when I left the house in the morning, catching me muttering to myself or practicing fake conversations for job interviews. She'd even labeled one clip. "He says you've got this like 4 times LMAO. She sent it to her group chat. I wasn't supposed to see that. But I did. And the worst part? I agreed with them. I did sound pathetic. I was pathetic. You'd think this would be the breaking point. But no. The breaking point came at a funeral. Her grandfather's, actually. Small chapel. Rainy day? You know, the kind of atmosphere where even your thoughts whisper. And while everyone was quietly praying, she passed me a folded note across the pew. I assumed it was something serious. I opened it. "Your suit is giving math teacher who just got divorced." She put a smiley face at the end. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I looked at her. She winked. She winked at me during her grandfather's funeral after mocking me in ink. And somehow, I still wanted to be enough for her. I started doing things I thought might help. I joined a spin class. I stopped saying sorry before every sentence. I threw out my cardigan. You know the one, brown with the elbow patches. She hated it. I changed everything I could, but nothing changed her. Until the night I found the red dress. I'll tell you more in part 2. But just know this. When she saw me again years later, after the silence, after I rebuilt, after I left her with no warning and no clue, she whispered, How did you do it?" I gave her 2 words. She dropped. Literally dropped. On the floor. Shaking. "No, it can't be." She hid my keys in the freezer, wrapped in foil, next to the bag of peas neither of us ever touched. I searched for 2 hours, almost missed work, nearly called a locksmith. When I finally found them, I stood there, holding the cold metal like it meant something bigger, and just stared into the open freezer like it could give me answers. She didn't deny it. In fact, when I asked her, she barely looked up from her phone and muttered, "Must have been a ghost," followed by a chuckle. That laugh, it was the same one she used when she accidentally donated my college hoodie to Goodwill or forgot to save the last slice of pie she promised. It was small, petty stuff at first. But looking back, I think she was testing how far she could go before I broke. Like life was one long social experiment, and I was the emotionally constipated lab rat. But then came the box. It arrived on a Tuesday. Plain packaging. No return address. She opened it like she'd been waiting for it. Inside, a framed photo. Of her. And some guy? On a yacht. I remember because I thought, we've never been on a yacht. In the picture, she was wearing the red dress. The same one I found months ago stuffed behind the winter coats, smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. She didn't explain it. She didn't even pretend to explain it. Just smiled and said, "You don't recognize him, do you?" I didn't. That was the problem. That night, we had dinner in silence. She ate slowly, as if dragging out the suspense. She even lit candles, like it was date night. Except neither of us spoke, and the only music playing was the sound of my own teeth grinding. Then, halfway through her wine, she sighed and asked, "Do you ever think you missed your moment?" I blinked. "What?" "You know, like maybe you were supposed to be something. Someone. But it never happened. And now you're just orbiting." She didn't say it cruelly. That was the worst part. She said it with pity, like she was euthanizing an old dog with kind eyes. I didn't answer, because deep down, I knew she was right. I had missed something. I just didn't know what or when. A week later, I caught her whispering into her phone at 2 a.m. She was in the bathroom, door cracked open. I heard my name, followed by a laugh. I leaned in just enough to hear. No, he still thinks I'm joking. Then silence. Then the sound of the faucet running. I backed away like a thief in my own home. The next morning, she kissed me on the forehead and called me sunshine. Like nothing happened. Like she hadn't just carved another invisible wound I'd carry into the shower, the office, the dreams where I'd argue with her, but never win. I started planning my escape not long after that. Not out of revenge. I didn't have that in me. It was self-preservation. Like a snail retreating into its shell before someone steps down. But it had to be quiet. Clean. No drama. Because if I made a scene, I knew she'd win. She was better at performance. She always had been. So I waited. I stacked money in secret accounts. I boxed up my childhood photos and left them at my sister's. I started telling people I was thinking of moving, laying groundwork. And the night I left, she didn't even notice until the next morning. She called once, didn't leave a message. And just like that, she vanished too. No closure, no fight, just vacuum. But life didn't stop. It broke, shifted, rebuilt. And by the time she saw me again, years later, standing in that museum lobby in a city she didn't expect to find me in, her face drained of all color. She stepped toward me like I was a ghost in a crowded room. She said, trembling, "How'd you make it?" I gave her 2 words, and she collapsed, right there on the marble floor. I don't remember planting the recorder under our bed. That sounds ridiculous, but it's true. I must have ordered it during one of my many insomnia spirals, between Googling how to tell if you're being gaslit and watching old TED Talks about reclaiming identity. The package showed up 2 weeks after I forgot about it. A tiny device, smaller than a pen cap, with 30 hours of battery and a magnet strong enough to stick to the bed frame. No fancy app, just a switch. Slide it on, leave it, and hope for clarity. I wasn't looking for proof she was cheating. Honestly, by then, I didn't even care if she was. I was looking for context. Evidence that I wasn't crazy. That I hadn't invented this entire slow-motion collapse in my head. Because when someone mocks you with a smile, kisses you goodnight, then laughs behind your back like it's recreational sport, you start questioning your own memory. So I placed the recorder and waited. That day, I left the house like normal. Walked to the corner cafe, sat there for 3 hours pretending to read a book while my thumb pressed circles into the edge of my coffee cup. I remember wondering if she would even say anything. Maybe she wasn't hiding anything. Maybe I was paranoid. I almost turned back and pulled it out, convinced I was spiraling into full-on conspiracy mode. But I didn't. I waited until the next day to retrieve it. And what I heard changed everything. At first, it was nothing. Just the sound of creaking floorboards, maybe her walking around the room. Then silence. Then the sound of her talking. But not to herself. Her voice was low, intimate, the way she used to talk to me before everything turned clinical. She was on the phone. I recognized her special voice, the slightly higher pitch she only used when she wanted to seem charming. She said his name. Travis. I didn't know a Travis. She laughed. No, he doesn't suspect a thing. He's still making me tea every morning like I'm royalty. Then, more laughter. Then she said something that made my throat close up. He's like if Pinterest was a man. Soft. Full of ideas. No spine. Silence. Then another gem. He still flinches when I reach for his phone. It's adorable, really. At one point, she described my sleep noises in detail. Called them the whimpers of a man dreaming of confrontation he'll never have. Said I sounded like a dying cartoon character. I stopped listening halfway through. Not because I was angry. I wish I had been. That would have been easier. I was just hollow. Like my ribcage had been turned inside out. You know that feeling when someone calls your name in a crowd and you turn, but no one's there? That's what it felt like. Except it wasn't my name. It was my identity. My dignity. And she was the one calling, just to mock the echo. That night, I made her dinner. Lasagna. Her favorite. She said it was the best I'd ever made. Kissed me on the cheek. Told me I was sweet. I smiled. But I knew. I knew everything. What's strange is how much you can function after your emotional bones have been shattered. I still went to work. Still paid the bills. Still mowed the lawn. But inside, I was already halfway out the door. I started speaking less. Observing more. I became a ghost with a good credit score. Then came the final straw. A party. She insisted I go, even though I hate parties. Said it was important networking and that couples who show up together get remembered. I dressed up, wore the shirt she picked out, practiced my smile in the mirror. We arrived. It was loud, crowded. I clung to the edge of the room like a shadow. Then I heard her laugh, that laugh, and I turned. She was mimicking my voice to a group of strangers, doing impressions of me, saying things I've said in the past, like a comedy set. She even hunches her shoulders and says in a nasal tone, "Well, actually, the parking app crashed, so I panicked and came back inside." They were roaring. She was glowing, and I was invisible. I stepped outside, took a cab home alone, left her there, didn't text, didn't explain, just went home, unplugged the Wi-Fi router, took out the trash, and stared at the ceiling for 5 straight hours. That was the night I decided. No goodbye, no warning, no clue. I vanished. And years later, when she saw me again and whispered, "How'd you make it?" I gave her 2 words. Her body folded like a letter no one wanted to read. A week before I left, she sent me flowers. From herself. The card read, "From your secret admirer. You're doing great, sweetheart." Smiley face. No signature. Just enough to create the illusion that someone, anyone, had noticed I existed. The bouquet arrived at my office, all bright yellows and oranges, sunflowers and marigolds, loud and cheerful like the opposite of me. For half a second, I let myself believe it wasn't from her. I let the thought flicker. Maybe someone sees me. Maybe I'm not invisible. But when I got home and found the exact same handwriting on a post-it next to the coffee machine, saying, "We're out of oat milk," I knew. She wanted me to think someone else cared, so she could enjoy the moment when I realized it was just her. Again, there's a kind of cruelty that doesn't yell. It just taps, quietly, every day, like a drip from a leaky faucet you can't quite locate. And eventually, you start drowning in it, without even noticing you're wet. That was our marriage. It wasn't violent. It was ambient psychological erosion. A slow peeling of skin by way of sarcasm, pranks, and emotional redirections disguised as affection. It's not that she hated me. I genuinely believe she thought she loved me, in her own way. But to her, love looked like fixing, testing, toying. She treated my identity like an old appliance she never planned to use, but also couldn't throw away. She told her friends I was fragile but charming, like a chipped teacup you don't drink from but display on a shelf ironically. A few days later, I woke up to find my clothes color-coded by vibe. She had rearranged my entire closet. One row was labeled, "Do not wear around my friends." Another, "If you must." The only unlabeled clothes were the ones that had gone mysteriously missing weeks earlier, like the navy sweater she used to say made me look professorial in a tragic way. I confronted her, asked if she thought this was normal. She rolled her eyes and said, "Bennett, I'm trying to help you." I said, "You want to help me disappear?" She smiled. Now we're getting somewhere. I wish I could say I left then, that I finally grew a spine and walked out. But I didn't. I froze. Like always. I stood there, surrounded by hangers and judgment, and said something pathetic like, "Do you want me to go?" And she just shrugged and walked away, humming to herself. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. My eyes were open, but everything else inside me was shutting down. The last straw wasn't some big fight. It wasn't infidelity, or violence, or even the emotional neglect, though all of that brewed in the background like a storm no one was tracking. It was a photo, an old one. I found it in a drawer while looking for an extension cord. A picture of me, years ago, at a cabin we rented during our first year of marriage. I was holding a sparkler, wearing that ridiculous beanie she loved. She took the picture, wrote on the back in messy ink, "You make me feel like I'm in a movie." I stared at that photo for an hour, and then I set it on fire. Not out of anger, but to create a moment. Something definitive. Something with a beginning, middle, and end. Because everything else between us had become this endless gray mush of passivity and biting humor. I needed fire, even if it was small and quiet and only mine. So I left. That night, I didn't write a note. I didn't pack dramatically. I didn't even take everything. Just enough. Essentials. Passport. Cash. One bag. No explanations. No trail. Gone. And for 3 years, I stayed gone. I changed cities. Changed jobs. Took up hobbies that didn't make sense. Started going to therapy with a woman named Lizette who once told me, Sometimes the slowest drowning is the hardest to notice, especially when someone keeps handing you flowers while you're under. I like that. I tattooed it on my arm. In Latin. Because of course I did. I thought I'd never see her again. But fate, or irony, or whatever force enjoys callbacks, had other plans. I was standing in line at a museum, an exhibit about broken objects, of all things, when I heard my name. Not yelled. Whispered. Like a spell being cautiously cast. Bennett. I turned. There she was. Hair shorter. Eyes wider. Wearing that same red dress, somehow. She looked at me like she'd just seen a ghost wearing a better version of her mistakes. She stepped forward and said, How did you make it? I gave her 2 words. She staggered. Her lip trembled. Then her knees buckled. And for the first time in years, I didn't move to catch her. It was never part of the plan to look back. But the thing about disappearing is that it works too well. People stop asking where you went. They start rewriting you in their heads, as a coward, a villain, or worse, someone forgettable. You become a blurry character in their origin story. And somehow, they end up the protagonist, even if they were the one doing the damage. I could have lived with that. But then Sarah called me. She was Mara's old college roommate. I hadn't heard from her in years. Honestly, I didn't even know she had my number. The call came in around 2 a.m., which is either drunk dial o'clock or death notice hour. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short, slurred, but clear enough to shake something loose inside me. You were never the crazy one. I just needed you to know that. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I called her back. She picked up like she'd been waiting. There was silence, then a deep sigh, like she'd been carrying a confession that had grown teeth. She told me about Travis. The real Travis. Not the imaginary fling I thought Mara was having, but the long-term one. The guy she started seeing 6 months before our wedding and didn't stop seeing until a year after I left. He wasn't some fantasy or joke. He was real. He had keys to our house. He parked down the street during family holidays. And, according to Sarah, he'd once slipped up and introduced himself to Mara's cousin as her other half. It wasn't just an affair. It was a second relationship. And I'd been the front-facing mascot while she test drove another life behind my back. Sarah said Mara called it emotional insurance. Said she wasn't sure I'd ever grow up, so she kept Travis around, just in case. But here's the thing that gutted me most. It wasn't even about love. Not with either of us. Mara wasn't looking for connection. She was collecting control, like a person who keeps fire extinguishers in every room, just in case someone lights a match. When I asked Sarah why she was telling me all this now, after all this time, she said, because she still talks about you like she owns you, and I can't watch it anymore. Then she hung up. I sat on my floor for a long time after that. No music. No lights. Just me and the sound of a neighbor's dog barking through the wall. There was a rage I didn't know how to process. Not the loud, dramatic kind. The quiet explosion kind. The kind that folds your soul into sharp corners and hides it inside your ribs. I wanted to scream, but it felt like screaming would validate something she did, like I was still reacting on her terms. So instead, I made a list. It wasn't a revenge list. I'm not that guy. It was a clarity list. A written account of everything I'd ignored, excused, laughed off, or swallowed like it was my duty. Every red flag I'd painted green. Every small humiliation I'd let slide for the sake of keeping the peace. Every little death that had led to my own erasure. By the end, the list was 4 pages long. I folded it once, burned it in a metal bowl, watched the edges curl, let the smoke sting my eyes like punishment. Then I opened my laptop and wrote an email. Not to her, to myself. Subject line, proof that I existed. It was full of memories. Raw ones. The stuff no one would ever know. The hours I spent choosing the perfect gifts. The time I took 3 buses in the rain to surprise her at work with lunch. The time I stayed up with her all night before her grad school presentation, editing her slides while she cried over formatting. The version of love I gave, flawed, yes, but real, and the way it died, unheard. I kept that email in drafts. I still have it. Not for closure. For record keeping. A few weeks later, I got a letter. Yes, an actual paper letter. My name written in her handwriting, neat and tilted. No return address. I stared at it for a day before opening it. Inside was a single page. It wasn't an apology. Not really. Just a ramble. She said she didn't recognize herself anymore. That she'd gone to therapy. That she understood, the harm she caused through humor. And then, in the last paragraph, she wrote, "I used to believe I was the main character. But now I think maybe I was just an intermission in your story." I didn't reply, not because I hated her, but because part of healing is resisting the urge to narrate it to the person who broke you. And then came the museum, the exhibit on broken things. Me standing by a sculpture of a shattered mirror, reading the plaque, when she said my name like it had been buried under her tongue for years. That moment, her voice, that dress, the guilt sprinting across her face, it was cinematic. But what people don't realize is that real closure is anticlimactic. It doesn't come with music or poetic symmetry. It comes with silence. It comes with restraint. She asked, "How did you make it?" I looked at her, not with anger, not even with pity, just distance. And I gave her 2 words. She collapsed, right there, among the artifacts of what once was whole. And I walked away. The moment she fell to the museum floor, no one knew what to do. A small crowd formed, the kind that stares just enough to feel helpful, but not enough to actually help. A security guard called for medics. Someone offered her water. She didn't faint, not technically. She folded, like her body just gave up trying to carry the version of herself she thought I'd remember. I didn't stay, not to be cruel, not to gloat, but because I realized in that instant, standing among curated ruins, beside a woman who used to mock me for crying at Pixar movies, that the story had already ended. It didn't matter what came next. I had already survived the part that was supposed to destroy me. I left the museum, stepped out into the noise of the city, and did something I hadn't done in years. I laughed. Not bitterly, not triumphantly, just softly. The kind of laugh that feels like air being let out of a balloon you've been clutching for too long. I didn't feel proud or victorious. I felt light. And then I forgot about her. Or at least I thought I did. A month later, I received an email. Subject line: "For when you're ready." No name, no intro, just a Google Drive link. At first, I didn't click it. I told myself it wasn't worth it, that I'd built too much peace to poke the ashes again. But curiosity is a hard thing to starve when it used to be your survival instinct. So one night, long after midnight, I gave in. The folder was titled, "The Apology That Wasn't Meant for Me." Inside were audio files, dozens, all dated, all labeled with vague little names like Thursday Thoughts or Not For Him. I clicked the first one. Her voice filled my headphones, tired, slower, missing the sharpness she used to wear like armor. She wasn't talking to me, not directly. It sounded like therapy sessions she had recorded for herself, or maybe something she never meant anyone to hear. The first few were surface level. Reflections about control, perfectionism, how she never learned how to love someone who didn't perform for her validation. But the fourth one stopped me cold. Sometimes I wonder if I loved who he was, or who I thought he could become. And I don't know which is worse. She paused, took a shaky breath. I made him smaller because I was terrified he might grow without me. And then he did. There was no crying, no dramatic music, just silence. A kind of silence that rang in my ears long after the file ended. I listened to every single one. Hours of her trying to understand herself, never asking for forgiveness, never playing the victim, just unraveling the mess she'd wrapped around both of us for years. She talked about her father, about watching her mother humiliate him in public, then praise him in private like that somehow balanced the scale. She talked about learning that love meant control, and that softness was something you weaponize before someone else uses it against you. In one recording, she said, "He never stopped showing up. I just stopped noticing. And when he left, it wasn't loud. That's what haunts me. He disappeared like he never believed I'd chase him. And I didn't. I waited for him to crawl back. But he didn't. And I hate that I respect him for it." I didn't know what to do with all of this. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like finding someone else's diary in the wreckage of your old house. A house you barely escaped from, still coughing up smoke. So I left it in the inbox. I didn't reply. But that night, I walked to the corner store and bought a candle. A small one, plain white, no scent. I lit it, sat across from it, and for 20 minutes, I let myself mourn someone who wasn't dead, just unreachable. Not by distance, by time, by who we used to be. That was the last time I thought about her without bitterness. The next day, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it ring, then another, then a voicemail. It wasn't her. It was her mother. The voice was formal, almost rehearsed. She said Mara had asked her to call, that she was leaving the country for a while. somewhere remote. To stop performing for people who are already gone. She ended the message with, I think she hoped you'd say goodbye, even if it's just for the version of you she remembers. I deleted the message without listening to it again. Because that version of me? He's not here anymore. And she's the one who buried him. I hadn't said her name out loud in over 2 years. Not to anyone. Not even to myself. Really. After the museum, the recordings, the voicemail from her mother. All of it. I closed the chapter, filed the grief under miscellaneous in my head, and buried it beneath routines. Coffee. Work. Walks in quiet neighborhoods where no one knew who I used to be. But the past doesn't knock. It walks in when you least expect it. And this time, it showed up wearing a name tag. Her name was Laurel. We met at an author event I wasn't planning to attend. A small bookstore in the city was hosting a poet I liked, someone whose work I used to read out loud when Mara was asleep, just to hear the words bounce around a room without judgment. I almost didn't go, but I've been feeling too human lately, too stable. I needed a controlled chaos. A new name to say, nice to meet you too. Laurel had dark curly hair, nervous hands, and a laugh like she'd stolen it from a happier person just to see what it felt like. We bumped into each other at the free wine table. Literally. She spilled half a glass on my shirt. Apologized 4 times in 10 seconds. We started talking. Stayed after the event. Wandered the aisles and talked about everything but the weather. I told her I used to be someone else. She didn't ask who. It was refreshing. For a while. Then came the question. Not from her. From a mutual friend I didn't know we had. We were leaving a little gallery downtown. One of those places with paintings that look like printer errors. And a woman walking by stopped in her tracks and gasped. Oh my God. Bennett? It was Claire. Mara's friend. Not a close one, but close enough. She had that look on her face like she'd stumbled across a crime scene she thought had been closed. Wow, she said. It's really you. We all thought you were in Portugal or something. Is she here too? I blinked. Sorry. Mara, she said. You guys are still? She trailed off when she noticed Laurel. I don't remember what I said in response. Something polite. Something forgettable. But the damage had been done. I saw Laurel's expression shift. Not into jealousy. Into calculation. A quiet reevaluation of the man beside her. That night, she asked me. Not gently. Not accusingly. Just plainly. Are you still married? I told her no. She asked how long it had been. I told her 3 years, officially. 5, if we're counting emotionally. Then she asked the question I hadn't been ready for. Did you leave her? Or did she leave you? And I froze. Because how do you explain the kind of leaving that happens in pieces? The kind where you disappear while still making breakfast? Where your body is still there, but your spirit's already packing a suitcase behind your smile. I said, I left. She said, why? I looked at her, sitting across from me in a restaurant filled with chatter and clinking silverware, and for a second, I saw Mara's face blur over hers, not as a ghost, but as a reminder that silence is never truly silent. I thought about all the times I'd begged for peace and mistook quiet for healing. So I told her. Not everything, but enough. I told her about the jokes, the dress, the recordings, the museum. I told her about the apology that wasn't meant for me. I told her about the 2 words. Laurel didn't ask what they were. She just nodded. Then she reached across the table, touched my hand, and said something I wasn't ready for. You don't talk like someone who left. You talk like someone who escaped. And that was when I knew. I still hadn't healed. I just rebuilt my house on the same fault line and prayed for different weather. A week later, I found a letter in my mailbox. Handwritten. No return address again. I knew the handwriting instantly. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. I set it on fire in the sink, watched the smoke rise, and whispered, this is the last time. But I was wrong. Because the past wasn't done with me yet. And Mara? She had one final twist left. The final twist didn't come in the form of a scandal. No last confession. No deathbed plea or dramatic confrontation in a rainy parking lot. It came, instead, in a package. Plain brown box. No return label. Inside, carefully packed between sheets of tissue paper, was the red dress. The dress. The one she wore in the photo with Travis. The one she wore the day she saw me at the museum. The one that always made her feel above. A symbol of control, allure, ego. And taped to the hanger was a note. For words, scrawled in faded ink. This doesn't fit anymore. That was it. No explanation. No apology. No name. And for the first time since she left my life, or, really, since I left hers, I smiled without bitterness. Not because I'd won. There was no scoreboard, no audience clapping, just the feeling that the war had ended, and I wasn't wearing armor anymore. I didn't keep the dress. I donated it to a shelter's charity drive, for someone else to reclaim and redefine it on their terms. I walked home through streets that used to feel like shadows and realized they looked different now. Brighter. Maybe the light hadn't changed. Maybe I had. Laurel stayed. Not as a savior. Not as some perfect replacement. But as a witness. Someone who didn't need to fix me. Someone who didn't want to narrate my pain like a project or turn my softness into a joke. She asked real questions. Sat in silence when there were no answers. She let me exist. And I learned to let myself exist, too. I stopped rehearsing my sentences before I spoke. I stopped flinching when someone said my name with weight. I started writing again. Small pieces, nothing grand. Just thoughts. Memories. Honest moments I no longer felt ashamed to feel deeply about. Eventually, I told Laurel the 2 words. The ones I said to Mara at the museum. She had waited months to ask. I looked her in the eyes and said, I did. That's all it was. Not I made it. Not I healed. Just I did. 2 words that told the entire story. I left. I rebuilt. I survived. I lived. And in the end, that was enough.